Thanks for joining us on 938 Live, and today on Talkback, asking you whether academic meritocracy has become so entrenched in Singapore that really broadening our definition of merit remains challenging for us.
I think it's so ingrained in our society. You have to go to JC, you have to go to university.
And not just go, you've got to score A's and, top marks
the
for
local university as well. That's right.
And for a long time, I think a lot of people were being judged, even at the workplace, based on their paper qualifications. But let's face it, things have changed in Singapore at the institutional level today as well.
But have you changed?
That is the thing. So the government is making certain moves to redefine success beyond academic merit. But what's really going on the ground? Since the Applied Study in Polytechnic and ITE Review, or ASPIRE Committee, made its recommendations, and those recommendations, of course, were designed to nurture and recognize the skills and capabilities of Poly and ITE students. At least one reader of the Today newspaper, Carina Tay, said, well, if too heavy an emphasis is placed on granting more opportunities only to Poly and ITE students now, would the meaning of meritocracy be diluted? I mean, she did say that she's all for redefining what talent is, and she admits readily that Polys and ITEs are not short of talented individuals, and they do deserve recognition. But she asks whether we are at risk of overcompensating in our rush to recognize those who are less academically inclined. Many of you have written in response to that to say that really it is not about diluting meritocracy, rather it's about broadening our definition of merit. We want to know what you think now. Call us on 669-11938. Joining us in the studio, social commentator, political commentator Kirpal Singh. He's from the Singapore Management University and Member of Parliament, Zainuddin Nordin. Now, Mr. Zainuddin, I would like to start with you. You were recently mentioned by Prime Minister Lee Hsien Loong as being among the MPs who had risen through the Polytechnic route. What do you think of what Today reader Carina Tay has raised, that we might be at risk of overcompensating now in our drive to recognize those who are less academically inclined?
I can understand where she's coming from, but I would agree with you rather to say that it's about broadening of meritocracy rather than diluting, because we know there are people who sometimes go overboard and looking at academic achievements rather than looking at the individual as an person who can contribute to society at many different levels. So I think the broadening of the definition of meritocracy is something which I would prefer to see the efforts. That's what we are doing now.
You said you can understand, though, where she's coming from. Shed more light on that.
The fact that she thinks that we are diluting, the fact that she thinks that we're diluting is the discomfort of change. It's about people who are trying to adapt to something that is changing now, because she's so used to the old way of definition and the way we look at meritocracy. But now we are trying to say, let's look at people, at the way they contribute to society, the kind of things that they can do, the excellent work that they can do. Doesn't mean that if they don't have paper qualification, they cannot contribute and do well.
Before we bring Kirpal into this, I think a lot of people are also wondering how we ended up in this place where academic merit was valued over everything else. Why was that the narrative of the government at the beginning?
I think when you look at how Singapore has gone through development in the past 50 years, we can understand that in the early days, they are not easy ways for us to rise and do things, because with the early days we were so very backward. But when you look at the people who are able to lead, the people who are able to bring the nation forward, it is very natural for us to see that people who we assume to be brighter, the leaders, the people who are more capable in back then, are naturally the people who have higher qualification. But now we can see things have changed a lot. People are able to contribute and do things in many, many different ways. So I think that is the old heritage that we have gained in the past. But let us see how we can change and do things even better.
I want to bring Kirpal into this. Kirpal, you went the humanities route. Many of us went through the humanities route, and it wasn't really recognized. We wanted the hard skills. Your math and science was the mainstay of education for the longest period of time. Do you think this is a step in the right direction?
The current move?
Yes.
I think so. And I think the reason why we're having all these problems and complications is that we always tend to think in terms of polarities, that one area that is emphasized is somehow going to undermine another area. In other words, it's a kind of human nature, that is even the playing field as you and I, that somehow I must beat you or you must beat me, and so there's a kind of competition. We don't seem to be involved in the thing that let's make it a win-win situation. I think part of the problem about this meritocratic debate is that I think the government now realizes that almost every person in Singapore merits a real role, meaning deserves a real role, and therefore is going to be a real contributor to the evolution of a new society. But people's perceptions are so embedded in the old paradigm that I have to be a super student in a very narrowly defined academic sphere in order to earn that merit. And I think this is where the tensions are actually rising, I think. And part of the problem is that the government did such a brilliant job in rewarding people they felt merited those rewards and recognition that there has become a community of people known as the scholars who are in some ways the benchmarks for other parents. So they'll say, you see that person, he had 9 A's, he had 21 A's. Sure. And that becomes a kind of benchmark for the success, young ones to follow. And
but that's the thing, the government is trying to change it. But can we change our own perceptions is something we'll be discussing. Also, what really is the meaning of a meritocracy? A lot of people have criticized it as being an every man for himself type of environment. That is the context that it has grown to become and flourish in. Call us on 669-11938. Let's see what Mr. Tan has to say about this. Hi, Mr. Tan. Good morning.
Yeah, good morning. First of all, meritocracy from day one, number one in Singapore, should be conditional. There's no such thing as an open-ended meritocracy. In that case, we can have a Malaysian citizen becoming the Prime Minister. We can have a lot of other people. We don't have to pay millions to have our
okay, when you say, Mr. Tan, that meritocracy needs to be conditional, what conditions are you thinking of?
The condition is that, number one, take care of yourself first. In other words, within Singapore, you put in all the Singaporeans and say, okay, who is the best for that job? Then you put him there. That is conditional. That means, in other words, you cannot open the floodgates to the whole world and say, okay, conditional, then we don't need we don't need all these people.
Okay, so you're saying that in spite of everything, it needs to be Singaporeans first. If we were to look at meritocracy and how it's practiced or recognized among Singaporeans, what would you say are the key things?
No, the key thing is, we have a lot of brilliant people. All of us there are so many brilliant people who are marginalized because they're not given the opportunity. And because you do not train, you do not give them the opportunity, how can they excel? All
right, thank you very much for that, Mr. Tan. I believe that's also being looked into. We're looking at Skills Future Council, so on and so forth. We'll continue discussing that in just a moment. Stay with us on 938 Live. Getting you talking now on Talkback. Call us on 669-11938. Are we capable of broadening our definition of merit in Singapore beyond academic merit, beyond having an exam meritocracy? Joining us today, social and political commentator Kirpal Singh from the Singapore Management University and Member of Parliament, Mr. Zainuddin Nordin. Now, Mr. Zainuddin, you were recently mentioned by the Prime Minister as being among the MPs who had risen through life, through the Polytechnic route. However, did you face, especially at a time when the perception surrounding Polytechnic education may not have been entirely positive, did you face discrimination challenges?
I think it's not about discrimination or challenges. It's about the situation back then. I would imagine in the early days when after the O-levels, people decide to go on a different path. And then once you are in the poly, there's always the assumption that you go out to work immediately and not go up and further up your studies. Only small percentage of the poly students back then go on.
Why did you choose the Polytechnic route?
Because when you look at the early days, there are a lot of practical issues that we have to think about, and very often it's about economic reasons, and we try as much as possible to go out to work to help the family and so forth.
Indeed.
Yeah. So I think it's not the wrong or right decision, but it's about the practicality. And at the end of the day, I'm very happy and blessed that I've got opportunities subsequently to further my studies. And I think this is about the
but
issue.
Did people see you differently? Did people see you
I think it's
as compared to, someone who had a university degree when they started work?
I think there is always this perception. You can understand because the level of contribution that people expect from you, the level of work that you are do, job description and so forth. But it's about individual.
Your peers, same age, who went to the university, and you had to take a longer route. Any regrets on that matter?
I think if you were to ask me again, I would say it's a wonderful experience because you go through life differently and you can share, and then, the opportunity to be able to work before you go on to study is also a wonderful experience.
But the advancement track might have been a lot slower?
I would agree. Yeah, it takes a longer time, but no less important because you work, and I think the experience is also a learning journey. So my view is that part of my experience is considered as part of my educational path.
Kirpal, being in the tertiary sector, do you think students have this entitlement complex that I've gone through this, I'm here right now, I deserve the best of the best when I come out?
I deserve better than Poly and ITE graduates, even though their skill level might be higher than mine?
I think so.
Still,
I would be not telling the truth if I didn't actually agree to that. I think most of my students feel that because they're in the university, they deserve better breaks, better salary, starting points, and all of that than anyone else that comes from the polytechnics and all of that. However, I think we need to contextualize this discussion as well. And just as the whole definition of what is meritocracy is now subject to a lot of amplification and flexibility, our idea of education itself has also broadened. I mean, when I was younger, polytechnic education was very, very strictly hands-on. You know what I mean? Really vocational. Nobody saw polytechnic as even remotely being academic. And the whole idea of a university was being nothing but cerebral. Nobody saw a university graduate as having any hands-on experiences. But now the two are so mixed. I mean, now there's a kind of fluidity that allows a person to enter university, perhaps takes a year, exchange in a polytechnic, either in Singapore or elsewhere, and come back to a university degree, or a polytechnic student who shows very good inclinations to be academic, goes to a university for a year or 6 months, comes back. So I think there's a lot of movement that way. And I think also Singaporeans generally are much more now aware, by and large, that the idea of who merits what is no longer a given. And this is where I want to address our caller's concerns.
Yes, he said Singaporeans first.
That's right.
I wanted to go to that.
Mr. Tan's concerns. Now,
at least have Singaporeans first, because there need to be conditions to meritocracy. What do you think?
Now, I think there are two ways of looking at it. One is a historical perspective. As far as I know, no society historically has triumphed beyond a certain point without allowing others to come in and compete with its own let's say, citizens. In other words, an open society means that in order not to stagnate, you do need the courage and the confidence to say, I'm going to open X number of university places to the world because we want to bring in the best from the world. And I think the one nation that showed this remarkably has been America. And though a lot of America is for Americans only, nevertheless, it is also very brave in saying, for these areas that we need people, anybody from the world who can say that he or she excels will be welcome. I think we need to do that. I think it's very easy to be exclusive, and which is very good. And for some reasons, like in the political domain and all of that, I think we do need those qualifications and the conditions that Mr. Tan might be, interested to know obtain. But I think it will be a death knell if we completely shut off and say, as far as we are concerned, the idea and notion of meritocratic behavior, conduct, excellence only is restricted to Singaporeans.
But here's the thing. You also don't want to create an environment where people are constantly afraid that they're going to lose their lunch.
Oh, absolutely.
Do you? I mean, there needs to be a healthy competitiveness.
Absolutely.
So where's that balance? How to draw that balance as a society?
I think losing your lunch is one thing, but the idea is that lunch can come in a very nice package for everyone. But if you always, know that the playing field is very narrow and very limited, it's like a game of sports, right? If you're always playing with people at your level and you beat each other, there's no competition.
Yeah.
But when
Exactly.
you think that, oh my God, here is another benchmark that's higher, that shows that if you can beat that person or get that person to be on your side, I mean, professional football clubs know that, right? That's why they bid for each other. I mean, this whole idea of talent and being advantaged.
But
I
a
think the
healthy
nervousness-
competition, a healthy competition,
Healthy
rather than a
competition.
destructive
I think-
competition.
I'm
Mr.
not
Zaid,
saying that. I'm not saying it should be the expense of Singaporeans,
Yeah.
but I think it'd be good to try and welcome the people who are very, very good to say that we are now confident to say whoever is the best shall get this particular role to play.
Which is difficult because if
Really
someone's
difficult.
child cannot get into a certain thing because someone else had a place reserved, that benchmark
is
thrown out the window again. You see?
We'll also be talking about
It's
other
complicated.
issues,
Yeah.
other issues that have come up in the context of the Singapore system, such as school affiliations. How children of alumni receive some priority in terms of getting into what are perceived as better schools. On a larger scale, is it possible for Singaporeans to redefine what merit means? Recently, some people have brought up the idea that perhaps if too heavy an emphasis is placed on granting more opportunities to Poly and ITE students, we would dilute the meaning of meritocracy. Are we at risk of overcompensating in our rush to recognize those who are less academically inclined? Perhaps that's something to consider. Now that at the institutional level the paradigm is changing and the government is trying to help society broaden its definition of merit as well,
And maybe we'll break the tuition cycle.
are we at risk of overcompensating though?
I don't think so. I mean, after all, the people from vocational institutes and polytechnics have suffered a kind of disadvantage for like more than 3 decades.
I would
so
say,
in a way, we're now just balancing the scores, as it were.
I've been
But-
calling it a recognition deficit.
Absolutely.
Mr. Zainuddin?
Absolutely.
I think
Yeah.
you are right there. It's about us all together, recognizing that maybe in the past we have not done enough. It's about time for us to do this change, and it's not overcompensating, because it's, for me, about trying to balancing the situation, and hopefully if we do it correctly, we will make it even better for us to be able to realize that a contribution of an individual does not depend on his paper qualification. There are many ways for an individual who's talented, through creativity, to innovation, and whatever that he can do, being excellent in society and recognized for it.
Now, education has been said to be the great social leveler. However, in recent years, and I mentioned this earlier as well, some people have been asking whether it really is. I mean, people bring up issues such as the advantages that children of school alumni receive in terms of getting into what are perceived to be better schools, the advantages of school affiliations, although it must be noted that more steps are being taken to increase diversity in schools. For instance, more places are being reserved at Primary 1 for those with no connections to the schools. What about the fact that wealthier Singaporeans, perhaps parents, can afford better tuition and enrichment for their kids, giving them inadvertently an advantage as well? So, considering this, do we really have a truly meritocratic education system in Singapore? Mr. Zainuddin first.
I have always been very fascinated by the fact that our parents, most of us, I'm a parent including, we try to do the best for our children.
Indeed.
We try as much as possible to ensure that they can do and grow to the best of their ability and their potential. And this is, again, if we want to allow for people to do whatever they can and can afford to do, I think we should encourage that. We shouldn't pull people back because we want to. But on the other hand, what we need to do is to push as much as possible the people who may not have those resources. That's what I think we should do as a society. Don't pull people back from the top, but on the other hand, we need to do as much as possible to help and assist so that people can all rise up to the occasion in as much as we can.
Now, your father finished primary school in a madrasa. Your mother never finished school, Mr. Zai. You've said before that they both nevertheless believed in the value of education. Growing up, though, did you feel disadvantaged when it came to comparing yourself to your peers in terms of them coming from, say, wealthier, more educated families and having an easier time achieving success?
No, I would say I wouldn't lie to say that I don't feel disadvantaged. I mean, when you come from a very humble background, when you look at others who can do more and get more, of course you feel disadvantaged. But nevertheless, I think it's about up to the individual wanting to do more and try to do better. If we continue to believe in hard work and discipline, if we believe that we can rise to the occasion through education, we have to work hard at it, and that's what I believe, and I hope the others will do the same.
A lot of effort has to be made in order to help people in the lower rungs of society rise as well, and steps are being taken in that direction. We'll talk more about those when Talkback continues right after the news. Thanks for joining me on 938 Live. Keith D'Souza and I
Indeed.
today leading you in Talkback. Call us on 669-11938, talking today about what meritocracy means to you. Has academic meritocracy become so entrenched in our country that broadening our definition of merit still remains challenging? Give us a call, 669-11938. Also going to be talking about other aspects of this. How can the widening gaps of inequality that result from meritocracy be mitigated without destroying healthy competitiveness? Are we also at a point today where the successful can transmit their advantages to the next generation? So much so that the playing field is skewed. Where does that leave the value of meritocracy? Joining us today is Kirpal Singh. He's from the Singapore Management University, and Member of Parliament Zainuddin Nordin. Now, let's talk about the issues that have been brought up in regard to meritocracy. It creates an every man for himself mentality. That's what some people are saying. What do you think, Kirpal, first of all?
I think to some extent that perception is accurate. I've experienced persons who have been the recipients of very wonderful recognition in that respect, but who do not seem to be willing to take on responsibilities beyond what they are prescribed, in their job scope and all of that. So I think we do need to pay attention to that as well. But by and large, I think Singapore's recognition of, the idea of meritocratic excellence has paid off, I think. And in fact, it's become so entrenched that people nowadays are afraid not to be somehow meeting those expectations. And I think now we've got to do the reverse, that the narrow definitions that were applied hitherto now would need to be expanded in so drastic a manner, because the world has changed. The demands of the global market today are so different from even what they were 5 years ago. I mean, as the joke nowadays is, I don't know what I'm preparing you for, because I don't know what's going to be available tomorrow in terms of jobs, pathways.
You should be preparing you to be adaptable.
Absolutely.
Right?
And therefore you need a broader skill set that will be adaptable, easily transferable, and also very quickly applicable, applicable to new situations, new demands. The other thing about the whole notion of a meritocratic society is that we are beginning to realize that the new world is not going to be so enamored of individual excellence as collective excellence. In other words, a lot of the people who received merit scholarships and all of that now have to work with other people in order to achieve something, because once upon a time, you can be the super brilliant academic and achieve world acclaim. Now, almost everything, even research in history, literature, requires collective team effort. Now, teams are very, very difficult creatures, as it were.
Even if all of you are of the same standard in the same field.
What they say, that if you get the best genius in violin, the best in cello, the best in drums put together, it will not make the best symphony orchestra necessarily.
So how this silo is going to be broken down? Or we
must break them down. We must break them down. I'm very proud. Singapore Management University was one of the first to do it. I'm very happy that our other universities are now also doing the same. We also broke down the barrier of exams by saying that the once a year exam or once a semester exam is no longer the clear gauge of what we mean by excellence. So I think the parameters are changing, the paradigms are shifting, and perhaps it's not reaching the ground as fast as it should. Yeah.
Call us on 669-11938. Do we actually also have an inequality of opportunity as a result of meritocracy? Wonder what you think. Let's see what Mr. Tam has to say. Hi, Mr. Tam. Good morning.
Hi, good morning, everybody. I guess there's no denying that meritocracy has brought us to where we are today, giving many people opportunities to excel in the areas. But I think there are two things that we need to guard against in this competitive environment. The first thing is being obsessively competitive. In the bid to win the trophy at the end of the race, we sometimes competition will lead people to have tunnel vision and ignoring the other factors that comes along during the competition. So what I mean by the other factors, meaning social compact. When we want to compete, we aim for the trophy. At the end of the day, we also need to consider the other people who are in the race as well. Once we cross the bridge, please don't destroy the bridge and make it a point to strengthen the bridge so that others can cross the bridge as well.
This is what I think we have started to call in Singapore a more compassionate meritocracy.
Yes, I think we have started to move in the right direction, but I guess more can be done. The second point is the idea of building a more vibrant society. I think having a vibrant society also means having a multitude of definition of what meritocracy involves, of what excellence involves. So in this aspect, we are not talking about individual peaks of excellence in, say, one particular field, say the academic field, but we're talking about multitude of peaks of excellence in the various fields, whether is it in the practical handscraft or skills-based. So, for example, some hawker who can fry a very good, tasty plate of char kway teow, for my lunch, should be given, the due recognition as somebody who is, say, skilled in financial matters, who can give me financial advice, to advise me on my financial planning.
Sure. Mr. Tam, certainly then the government narrative has also been moving in this direction, and many of us might agree with you. However, there is a whole constituency of people who perhaps will not agree with you in terms of developing a compassionate meritocracy, for instance. It's every man for himself. Why should I be helping people who are less meritorious than I am, is what some people might think. How do you think mindsets on the ground can change?
I guess for meritocracy to flourish, there needs to be a fertile ground, and the conditions of this of the fertile ground would be a sense of fairness and a sense of opportunity available to all. Perhaps to those who didn't quite make it in certain fields, they feel demoralized and feel that, I have not been given the right opportunity. But I guess that if you look at the world that is happening around us, there are many other places, where the opportunities are not even present for you to even give it a try. So I guess meritocracy is also a sense of attitude as well, a sense of never to bow our heads to failure and to keep trying and trying again.
Thank you very much for that, Mr. Tam, and we'll continue talking about this in just a moment. Do we have an equality of opportunity in Singapore? That's something else we'll be talking about too. Looking forward to your phone calls on 669-11938. Stay with us. Getting you talking today about what merit means to you. Is our meritocracy today the same as it was in our past? Does the definition of merit need to be broadened or softened? Call us on 669-11938 talking about academic meritocracy. Has it become so entrenched in Singapore that broadening our definition could be challenging? This was an issue that some Today newspaper readers brought up recently, and to discuss it in the studio with us today, social and political commentator Kirpal Singh from the Singapore Management University and Member of Parliament Mr. Zainuddin Nordin joins us as well. Mr. Tam called in earlier and he talked about the notion of a compassionate meritocracy in addition to several other issues, including the equality of opportunity as well. To what extent do you think it might be a little bit challenging to develop a compassionate meritocracy in a climate where many have started to think of meritocracy as an every man for himself type of concept? Mr. Zainuddin?
Where we look at society now, I would agree that we have changed a lot. Singaporeans, from the early days until today, we have become more affluent, more educated. In the idea of compassionate meritocracy, I think we need to start to see things in a different light, where we believe that An individual contribution is not just about his paper qualification. An individual can work well, do well, and contribute well to society in many fields and different ways. So I think the move towards that has to be about mindset change. That's the first point. Secondly, it's about the fact that if we want to provide opportunity for people, I think the argument has always been the starting point, right? If you are coming from a much more comfortable background and somebody who's coming from a very deficit background, where is a starting point? So this is where I think there is a role for the government to play and society at large to be able to contribute and help. So there need to be people, there need to be leaders, there need to be system to allow for us to be able to ensure that the starting point can be at least seen to be available and people can be there and the opportunity is open to everyone.
Will this be a more intrusive meritocracy? Like, you see, if everyone has 7 A's and I'm competing for this particular job, would it mean that the person who had a more disadvantaged background would have the edge, although we're all on an equal playing field?
No, I think if you look at what role of society, it's not about competing for the sake of competition, right? There must be real outcome. What is the outcome? We want a better society, better life for everyone, right? So to me, what we are hoping for in Singapore is for us to be able to arrive at a situation, but it's an ideal and a vision which we want for everyone. But if we want to have that everybody must step up. And if we think that there are people who are in a disadvantaged situation, do we just leave it that way, or do we do something about it? Or there are people who are better off, if they can afford to do something, can they contribute back? So I think this is the argument that we are talking about.
Of course, I mean, the government tries to level the playing field by providing, for instance, educational assistance and subsidies to those who need it. But some people might think it isn't enough in ensuring that everybody has the same starting point. After all, some people have an unlimited amount of funds for tuition, for instance. The thing is, and Kirpal, I'd like to put this to you, Christopher Hayes, who's the author of the book Twilight of the Elites, America After Meritocracy, he's talking about it in that context. He said that while meritocracy refers to the equality of opportunity and not outcomes, it would seem that if we didn't concern ourselves with the outcomes, we might end up seeing a horrendous inequality of opportunity as well. So he says that meritocracy can only come to flower in a society that starts out with a high degree of equality. So you have to work for equality first. However, in Singapore, I mean, the income gap has been seen as a problem lately. Do you agree, first of all, with what Christopher Hayes has said?
I think so. Yeah, I think he's spot on. Because if we are not careful, then a narrow-minded interpretation of meritocracy can result in fact, making the whole notion of equality worse rather than improve it.
But is it realistic to expect there to be equality and to happen continually for every generation that comes along?
Well, I think this is where the hallmark of a society begins to register itself in an intelligent, sensitive kind of way. There are people who would say, I want to achieve that $1 million by the end of this month, but on my way to achieving it, I saw 3 beggars, and I had to spend time with them, and I am not regretting that. In the end, I only got $500,000 rather than my desired goal of 1 million. Other people say, because their bosses tell them, I don't care what happens, you get that $1 million for me at the end of the month. And I think we've got to be very, very careful about not encouraging that second approach to life, which I feel is happening more and more among many young persons. I mean, they tell me frankly, they say, Prof, their problems are not my problems, and I don't want to make it my problem. Therefore, I will do what I think is right and what I think is fair, in a very narrow, skewed interpretation of that. Now, it is true that, you know, one reason why...
Should the government step in here? If people aren't going to do it themselves, should the government step in here? Even more progressive taxes.
Society at large also could be playing this role.
Yeah, I think it's a very difficult thing. I mean, the great religions of the world from day one have said the greatest challenges of our human beings to be selfless, compassionate and kind.
Nice.
We are not creating
ideals. Nice. But will this not lead to some form of affirmative action before we take that call? If we're going to be so compassionate, there must be some form of affirmative action. Quotas for this amount of people will reach this particular point in time, and
Well,
and so forth.
Then it becomes unfair.
Yes.
Yeah. But if you look
exactly.
at the happiness index and you look at this, you find that the Nordic countries, by and large, come in. But by the same token, they pay huge taxes. I mean, in other words, the same old lesson in life.
There's
You
a trade-off.
cannot have it all. You
There's a
cannot have it
trade-off.
all. There's always a trade-off.
Let's see what our next caller has to say. Bala joins us now. Hi, Bala. Good morning.
Good morning, everybody. And
Bala, I've only
morning,
got a
yeah.
couple of minutes, so I'd
Sure.
appreciate it if you made it quick. Yeah.
I think sometimes we sort of these terms like meritocracy is quite ambiguous to everybody. But maybe if I can just put it in a simple sense, I think it must be the belief that every Singaporean thinks that they can do their best and achieve whatever they want. I mean, it sounds very hairy-fairy, but maybe I just want to put an example here. You know, the story of the bobsled where the African team went out there and, you know, they didn't have any snow in Africa, but...
Jamaican, I believe it was.
Yeah, Jamaican, that's right, I'm sorry. Yes. Yeah, but, you know, that's the spirit that we need to create. So I think, you know, like what Bharati said, you know, when students are trying to perform their best, but then they see that there is an invisible obstacle here. They don't have the money to get tuition, or their parents, you know, don't have the time to take them there. So I think these invisible barriers are the ones that we need to, you know, try to minimize. And honestly, Singapore has done very well, but maybe the next hurdle would be these invisible barriers to, you know, make sure that we assess our students not on the textbook, but rather, you know, look at them and see the good qualities in them. Really.
Bala, you make a very good point, and the government has been taking some steps towards this in terms of helping with educational assistance, for instance, for those who need it. What do you think individuals should be doing here in order to have a more compassionate meritocracy? Because certainly you can't expect the government to be taking the lead on this all the time. How do you think more people can be encouraged to be part of a more compassionate system?
I really think the other way around. I think if you have the right policies, then people will, you know, grow up in an environment to say that I can do the best I can. It doesn't mean that I have to be a lawyer, a judge, or whatever it is, but, you know, I can be a great artist. But the thing is that I think some of our policies are half-heartedly cooked. You know, like if you look at the international schools, they don't encourage the kids to be having huge amounts of tuitions, or they assess them on a broader scale. And I think our schools need to take a brave step and break up these this kind of invisible barriers.
Right. Okay. Thank you very much for that, Bala. Okay. In closing, how do you think we can move forward in terms of offering not just an equality of opportunities, but more or less an equality of outcomes as well, which might actually be a little too idealistic, but give everyone a fair chance here in a fair system? First of all, Kirpal.
I think Bala is right in the sense that if the international schools can create wonderful people by doing a very different kind of job in a very different way, so can others, and we need to have the courage and the gumption to say, yes, we're going to do that too.
Mr. Zainuddin?
I think what we need to do is for us to be able to open up our minds, realize that individual can be measured in many, many different ways, and realize that if we as an individual, also as a society, want to change, we can change, and we should take the lead of recognizing people and value them properly.
And thank you very much both for joining us today.
Thank
and many
you.
thanks to all of you who called in. If you have more to say about whether academic meritocracy has become so entrenched in Singapore that we're still having challenges defining what merit is, we want to hear from you on our Facebook page, Official 938 Live. Thanks for staying with us.